Actually, before we turn to God's Word, let's just think about a question. Does it ever tick you off that everyone seems to be trying to cancel Christmas? I was mailing a package at Canada Post last week to our family in the U.S., and after we had finished our business, I said to the Canada Post employee, "Merry Christmas!" And then immediately, maybe somewhat tongue-in-cheek, I said, "Ooh, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to say that to an employee of the federal government, am I?" And she smiled and she said, "Go for it." But what are we supposed to do when everyone seems to be trying to cancel Christmas? How do we react? Well, let's think about the tone of our voice when we talk about it that reveals what we're really saying or really doing. Sometimes we say it in a defeated, discouraged, disappointed, maybe even a slightly bit manipulative way, whiny tone. When someone changes the way we've always done it, "Well, that was my favorite part. You can't cancel Christmas." Right? Some of you already had that family conversation this Christmas. Sometimes we say it in a fighting tone of voice. "They can't cancel Christmas, and we got to try and take on City Hall or the feds," right? We're looking today at the gospel writer Matthew's record of what we celebrate at Christmas, Matthew chapter 2. And we're going to be reminded of another way, a more positive and healthy way of saying you can't cancel Christmas. We're stepping out of our teaching series in 1 Peter until we get back. Well, sort of, actually. In Matthew's version of the Christmas story, the first version we're introduced to and the way the New Testament is laid out, we see the story set in sort of that chosen but in exile paradigm. Chosen by God, but sent into a world that is set against God. That's Jesus. So in one sense, we're still in the paradigm that we're looking at in 1 Peter. Turn to Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, and first book of the New Testament, second page. This chapter is what we might call the adult version of the Christmas story. In Matthew's account, there's no mention of the census, of Joseph and Mary's trip to Bethlehem. There's no inn, no stable, no manger, no angels, no shepherds. How can you have Christmas without any of those? Even Joseph and Mary are very much in the background. In Matthew 2, it's about the baby and actually two rather unexpected but significant characters. Well, really, only one central character, and from a narrative perspective, his foil. Now, the paragraph headings in our Bibles don't really help us understand what Matthew's trying to emphasize. If you look at the paragraph headings in your Bible, which, as you probably know, are not in the original manuscripts, the first two sections of Matthew 2, some of the translations, if you have the NIV, for example, it says, "The Magi visit the Messiah and escape to Egypt." Well, those things happen, but they actually obscure what Matthew's really saying. They're sort of the family-friendly titles. The ESV and the Christian Standard Bible, CSB, which are a little less PG rated. One section is called Massacre of the Innocents, or Herod Kills the Children, as the ESV says. If we're reading the story to our kids before bedtime, it would be, oops, let's just stop right there, right? Now, those headings are not inaccurate in terms of what happens, but as I said, they actually obscure the main point of this whole section. They don't help us to see that this entire passage, Matthew chapter 2 to Matthew chapter 18, is all about one man, a powerful man who tried to cancel Christmas, even after it happened. It's all about the reaction of King Herod to the plan of God in Jesus. 9 times in this chapter, in every single paragraph in the chapter, Herod's name is there. He's the main character, the main human character in every single section of this story. Jesus' name, 1 time. Only in verse 1 of the chapter is Jesus' name mentioned. In the rest of the chapter, when Jesus is referred to, he's almost always simply called the child, the child. Oh yeah, the wise men are there, Magi, the ones we want to highlight, but in terms of the storyline, they're just the foil. Their role in the story is to expose Herod for who he really is and what he's trying to do. Cancel the plan of God in Jesus that becomes real in time and space at Christmas. Matthew literally just glosses over the birth of Jesus at the end of chapter 1, verses 24 and 25. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. Just the facts. Only one reference to Jesus' birth, one line, bare facts like a newspaper announcement where he's being charged by the word, right? It's what happened following the birth of Jesus that's what Matthew wants us to come to terms with. So let's read it. Matthew chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one born king of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them till it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up, take the child and his mother, and escape to Egypt," he said. "Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and go back to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead." How come it's so quiet in here? We're not going to surface or speak to all of the things that come to our mind as we read this. We're going to talk about one main point, and then we're going to speak to two questions. So first, the main point. As we read this chapter from the perspective of the layout of the Bible, the first record of the big new step in the unfolding of God's plans to recreate what humans screwed up, the big lesson in this chapter is that we have to keep coming to terms with, well, it's the one we already put out there. You can't cancel Christmas. Not in a pleading, whining tone, not in a demanding, fighting tone, but simply in a matter-of-fact, confident tone. You can't cancel Christmas because you can't cancel what's already happened. Against all odds, it happened. I mean, really, when a baby's born, you can't cancel the birth. You can't press reverse, stuff it back in. It's happened. You can resent it. You can mitigate the results of it. You can reinterpret why it happened. But put whatever spin you want on it. You can react to it in all kinds of unhealthy ways, or you can work with it well. One thing you can't do is you can't make what happened unhappen. Now, Just briefly, let me put it out there, what I think that we need to be reminded of in the cancel culture time in which we live. It seems to me we would be a whole lot better off if we stopped trying to be antagonistic about attempts to cancel Christmas. Because Christmas can't be canceled. It happened. They can cancel how we celebrate it, but they can't cancel that it happened. What we're really trying to fight is whether the worldview of the Bible is the dominant worldview in our culture. And it's not. It never will be. And it's the wrong thing to focus on because Christmas can't be canceled. It happened. But that's only half of Matthew's main point. The reason nobody, not even King Herod, who was a representative of Rome, the reason nobody can cancel Christmas is that you can't cancel the plan of God. And the plan of God is Jesus. For almost every one of us, so many Christmases have involved canceled plans, haven't they? We lived for 29 years in Prince George. And since I felt obligated and actually excited to lead in a community-oriented Christmas Eve service at our church, we had to stay in town for that. Every once in a while, we'd drive down to Vancouver, which is where LaDonna's family lived, to spend New Year's with her family. But three times in 29 years, we tried to fly down to Vancouver on Christmas Day to be here for Christmas dinner. All three times, we got to the airport, sat and waited, once for 6 hours, only to be told the flight was canceled. You ever done Christmas Day stuck in a small airport with kids? When COVID hit us, most of us had to say, at least in some way, well, I guess that plan goes out the window, right? Some of us, and that would be me, hadn't even made plans yet when the mandates came down, but we were still ticked because COVID canceled the plans we would have made. But what Matthew wants to remind us of is that regardless of any plan that gets canceled in the way we want to celebrate Christmas, which usually has nothing to do with the real Christmas, it's disappointing, but it's not really that big of a deal. Christmas can't be canceled because you can't cancel the plans of God. And the plan of God is Jesus. That's what Matthew wants us to know and make sure we're coming to terms with. And by the way, we know Christmas happened not just because the Bible says so. There's a wonderful short little book by Rebecca McLaughlin that's just come out this year. It's called Christmas Unbelievable. It's what our theme this Christmas is about. That shows there's plenty of evidence for Jesus being real and the Gospels being accurate. Next Sunday, actually, at Christmas Eve, Brian is going to be taking us into that a bit more. You can't cancel Christmas. Against all odds, it happened. That's why the Magi are in the story. You see, for the Magi, it was all about the plan. Magi, which was a term for a broad range of people in the ancient Near East who were into some combination of astronomy, astrology, philosophy, and comparative religions. Depending on which of those was at the fore of their own personal thinking, many of them were legitimate seekers and thinkers, and some were early scientists, actually. Astronomy was sort of at the core of most of their mindsets. From the early days, as people would lay on their backs outside their tent, as my father and I would sometimes do in our backyard when I was a kid, they searched the night sky for patterns and designs. I still remember my father showing me and pointing out the Big Dipper and the North Star. The more they looked, the more they became convinced that the universe operated according to an order, a grand design, a plan. And their search became philosophical. If there's a plan, there must be a purpose. That's why the star is so significant. It's because the star broke the pattern. It didn't fit the plan. Or did it? Did it actually point to the purpose? They had to find out. Magi looked at the universe, and they also read the texts of all of the major religions of the day to see if what they said made sense regarding what the plan might be. They had witnessed a change in the universe, which in their mind indicated a change in the plan, or was it a new step in the plan? And if it was a new step, what really was the plan? In the Greco-Roman world of the time, legend had it that by watching the stars, Babylonian magi had already predicted the rise of Alexander the Great and of Caesar Augustus. Perhaps in their research, some of these magi had come across the prediction by the pagan prophet Balaam that God used to confront his people. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will arise out of Israel. A ruler will come out of Jacob. From the book of Numbers. Here's a star above Jacob, Israel. They have no choice but to chase this one down. And so, chapter 2 of Matthew. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of Herod, magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is this one who has been born king of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we've come to pay homage to him." These naive, seeking magi come to the person they think should know the most about what's going on. They go right to the top, the king, King Herod. Tell us about this one who's been born king. Now, if there's anyone in the king's court that heard the question of those magi, their first response was, uh-oh, this is not going where they think it'll go. These magi may be sincere, but they just knocked on the wrong door. This will not end well. For every one of them, there would have been immediate need to answer the call of nature or something, anything to not witness what was certainly going to happen next. You see, King Herod, their king, the current king of the Jews, by blood was only a half Jew. And he was declared king by Rome. Herod was a puppet king under Rome. By this time, he had ruled the Jews for 43 years already, the first 7 as governor, and as governor, he had been appointed by Rome, and when Rome realized that in order to keep them happy, the Jews needed to think of themselves as having a king, Rome said, okay, well, let's just call him king. But by then, everyone knew that Herod knew which side his bread was buttered on. Now, Herod did a lot of good things for the Jews. He built a magnificent temple so they could do their formal worship. He had done a great job of resourcing them during a major famine. But he always was a puppet to Rome. He would never lead them against Rome. And what made it even worse? Herod was absolutely paranoid. If he got any whiff that someone might even be thinking of undermining him, and toward the end of his life, he got worse. He killed his favorite wife and at least 2 or perhaps 3 of his sons and several of his other close associates. Paranoid and powerful, with the backing of Rome, there's no way this was going to end well. So you got to look closely at the question these magi asked. Where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? It's not where is the one who has been born to become king of the Jews. It's where is the one who is born king of the Jews. One of the things that fed Herod's paranoia and stoked his anger was that no matter how much good he did for the people, he knew that in their hearts they considered him a usurper, an imposter. He was not really their king because he was not born king. He would absolutely have known the scriptures which had predicted that one day a ruler would come that would be the born king from the line of David. And so the motto that drove him would have been something like this: one day baby, one day maybe, but not on my watch. Herod's got a good thing going, and he knows that if this is true, his gig is up. Verse 3. When Herod heard the news, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Why is Jerusalem disturbed? Because what they see is upheaval coming. Herod may not be perfect, but at least we have a good economy, no wars. The status quo may not be perfect, and it may not last. But it's better to preserve the status quo. Better the devil you know than the devil you don't know, right? And so Jerusalem is disturbed. And so Herod goes to the experts. The experts on what? The experts on the plans of God. Verse 4, when he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, the word of God, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. Notice what Herod asks, not whether the scriptures promise such a king, but where this Messiah, the one sent from God, was to be born. Verse 5, in Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. In the many prophecies, hundreds actually, of this one who would be born to rule the earth, there were several references to the town of David as his birthplace. This particular one is from the book of the prophet Micah, chapter 5. And Herod sets out to do what had been tried many, many times before from the Garden of Eden on. Herod tries to cancel the plan of God. So you got Magi who genuinely want to know the plan of God, and a king whose one big goal is to cancel the plan of God. Can you see how the point of this whole account is to show that even though God's plan involves a vulnerable, helpless baby born to a powerless young couple, there are no powers on earth or the whole universe that can cancel the plan of God. And Jesus is the plan of God. Folks, whether we claim to know and follow Jesus or not, the number one thing we have to continue processing is, am I responding well to this one who was born king? Am I responding well in this situation that I'm in to the one who was born king over all the earth? Am I really following Jesus, surrendering to Jesus, submitting to Jesus, resting in Jesus through this situation? Or am I sitting on the sidelines, or perhaps allowing all kinds of feeling static to distort what I see, losing connection in my head to the true head because he does not seem to be cooperating with my plans? You can't even talk about the plan of God for you in any situation without bumping into Jesus, because you can't cancel the plan of God, and the plan of God is Jesus. So that's the lesson. The wise men look for it. Sorry, you can go back one slide, please. We're still back in that. The wise men look for it. Herod reacts to it because of what he knows it means for him personally. How is it that you need to come to terms with the central Christmas truth that you can't cancel the plan of God? And the plan of God is Jesus. Perhaps some of us simply need to realize that all of those things that we see being canceled, those dreams we have that Christmas exposes will never be, none of that needs to threaten us. None of that needs to get us bent out of shape, because you can't cancel the plans of God. And the plan of God is Jesus. So we just need to have to tell our hearts, it's okay, breathe, relax, rest in the plan of God. perhaps some of us need to ask honestly the question, am I really in the plan of God in Jesus? You know, we can talk in these vague, generic terms about a good God with good plans, but the Christmas question is, have I personally said yes to the invitation of Jesus to come, follow me? I am the way, the truth, and the life. You're not in the plan of God if you haven't said yes to Jesus. So let's move on in Matthew's account. One of the things I love in this account is that it doesn't sugarcoat reality, doesn't just leave us with some pious platitudes. As it records what really happened coming out of the events of that first question, it surfaces some huge issues, some big questions that we have about God's plan and how it rolled out and how it's rolling out in our lives, right? This morning, for the rest of our time, we're just simply put on the table and think about two questions that this account very clearly surfaces about God's plan in Jesus that can't be canceled. Questions that sometimes make us wonder whether God's plan is really as good as we'd like to believe it is. First, well, what's our default criticism? The go-to card that we always play after we've reacted and confronted someone about a decision that was made that didn't go the way we wanted it to go. After we've let off our steam, our final jab is often this: okay, I get that I can't change it. I see why you decided, but the timing really sucks. Could you not have picked a better time? Isn't that what we often struggle with about how God does or doesn't work in us and with us? Sometimes we don't blame God. We blame the people around us, the people who make the decisions that impact us. You couldn't have picked a worse time to do this, to drop this news. Or when it comes to what isn't happening, it's like, God, I want to trust you, but if you're going to come through, now would be the time. Some of us are at that place this Christmas. The very first question of the chapter puts that timing issue on the table, right? After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, during the time of King Herod, as the whole scenario comes to a climax with the slaughter of innocent babies, that really does make the timing of it a very relevant question, doesn't it? It's even more stark when we realize that the timing God chose for Jesus' birth was toward the end of Herod's life, when his paranoia had certainly become a clinically diagnosable mental instability of some kind. It happened probably about 3 years before Herod died. It's like, really, God? Herod's going to die within 3 years. You've waited this long. Would 3 years really have made that much difference? You see, we like to talk about the timing of Jesus' birth as the perfect time, and so we go to the Gospel of Luke that frames Jesus' birth relative to the decision of another leader of the day that impacted his birth. Quirinius, the governor made a decree, not just a strong suggestion, a mandate that everyone, regardless of their situation, had to go to their ancestral home to be registered, a census for tax purposes. And we love pointing out that this census forced Joseph to take very pregnant Mary from Nazareth to Bethlehem, his ancestral birthplace, to register, which it just so happened was where the Old Testament scriptures had said Jesus was to be born. Joseph would never have gone there at this time if it wasn't for the census. Isn't God's timing amazing? And we quote Paul's observation in Galatians chapter 4, but when the set time had fully come, or at just the right time, the appropriate time in God's plans, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, so that we might become adopted as sons with full rights. That's also beautiful until we think about Herod and the other baby boys in Bethlehem and their fathers and mothers. Have you ever said that about God's timing? Isn't God's timing amazing? Do we ever realize that when we use that line, there's very likely somebody in the room who is saying, well, maybe it is for you. Do you ever struggle with God's timing? I have. And I do. There's many times when I want to say in my heart, the timing could not have been worse. I don't have to give you any examples, right? They come to our mind immediately. And often the timing issue turns into questioning all of the things we don't see God doing for us. How do we process that? Well, there's not a simple, tidy, black and white answer. God doesn't say there is. Actually, timing is part of the context of that great statement in the book of Isaiah. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. We'll never totally figure out the timing question. But that statement in Isaiah is made in the context of the timing issue of what God is not doing yet. And it's like God's ways may be higher, but they sure don't seem good for me. But would it help us if we could bring ourselves to flip that question? What if we say, this feels like it sucks? This really puts a monkey wrench in my plans. But what might there be in the timing of this that makes it the right time? In our text, how might the time of King Herod might be the right time for the birth of Jesus? Let's try to look at it that way from this text. What does this account tell us about how this actually might be the perfect time? Well, there's at least two things we need to see. Let's go back to the main point. It puts it right out there from the get-go, right from his birth, that nothing, nobody, not even the power of Rome and its puppet king can keep God's plan for his true king from being born and preserved, so that his death was at the right time in the way that fulfilled, and in the right way that fulfilled the plan of God. Now let's take that a step more personal. The fact that God's time for Jesus' birth was during the time of King Herod points to something for all of us. There's always some king in my life that controls my plans, that we think we have to appease or please so that life will work. And in the end, most often, that king is me. These Magi seekers had it right. This one who was born king. And as he grows and teaches and performs miracles to show his authority over nature, over illness, and even over death, it's very clear that we are to see that he was born king for all and over all, even me. I love the way Skye Jitani tells us what this means. Jesus did not come to bring immediate peace. He came to divide us from our illegitimate allegiances. We like the message of the angels in Luke, on earth peace, but we tend to forget or perhaps ignore the rest of that statement, on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests. Who is it that is in God's favor? It's Matthew's account that helps us to see that those, like the wise men, who see in Jesus the one we need to recognize as the only real king, the Lord of the universe, are in his favor. But it's not just Herod. The entire drama of God's story, from the beginning, right from the beginning, as we have it in the Bible, it's a story of two things. It's about kings and rulers who try to cancel God's plan for the Christmas that is to come. Think Pharaoh and baby Moses in Exodus chapter 1, which, like Jesus' story, includes the killing of a lot of baby boys. Over and over again, a lot of kings before Herod discovered you can't mess with God's plans for and through his people, the Jesus who was to come. Second, it's about kings and rulers who try to cancel God's plans. And second, it's about a lot of people who were God's people who don't trust or aren't willing to help pull off God's plan, and they give up and they give in to the Herods. They take the timing into their own hands and end up with an inferior or a disastrous solution. Think Abraham, who tried to help God out with his plan. because they doubt his timing, his ability to pull it off, right? God doesn't give Abraham the son he promised, and so Abraham produces for God a son from a servant. How did that turn out? We're still living with the consequences. And that points to a second way that we need to flip that question. How really do my timing plans usually work out? How many times in the story have God's people discovered that when you mess with God's plans, you're actually messing with yourself? And after Jesus came, Herod was only the first of many who kept trying to cancel the reason for Christmas. Probably the most famous of these was a man named Saul, even after Jesus died. And Jesus confronted Saul and said, Saul, Saul, it's hard for you to kick against the goads, against the way it's going according to God's plan. Saul got it and submitted to Jesus as God's plan, and he became the key reason why we are able to be here today. Saul led the push of the Jesus movement into the Western world. So what is it right now in your life in which timing is becoming a hurdle for you in fully engaging God's plan? Committing yourself to God's plan to live fully in and under Jesus. Maybe that's the place that God is inviting you to ask the king question. Who really am I allowing to be the king for me? It's Paul who puts the central timing issue boldly in 2 Corinthians chapter 6. I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. The time is still right, but someday it's going to run out for all of us. Are you in? That's a few thoughts about the timing question, but there's another huge question this account clearly surfaces about the plans of God that can't be canceled. Let's just think about it briefly. What about all the collateral damage? The killing of the innocents? How can you say God's plan is good when it caused so many tears and so much pain for so many people? God very directly and clearly steps in and intervenes to protect the child and the child's family. Well, okay, we get that. He also very directly intervenes to protect the Magi, to keep them from Herod's wrath, but he doesn't step in on behalf of the young families of Bethlehem. Does that bother you? I've been on both sides of that experience personally, as most of us have. It's life. God opening doors for me when he doesn't for others. It's so easy to think, well, I must be doing something right, but inside I'm fully aware that's not it. Because I've also been on the other side. And sometimes it feels like there are more of those times when God opens doors and pours his blessing on others and he's not doing it for me. He actually seems to be taking it away from me. Sometimes it seems like we're literally collateral damage when God blesses other people. And what does the collateral damage issue become in our minds? It's a justice issue, right? If God is a just God, where's the justice in that? How do we come to terms with that? Again, there are no simple answers, but let me just make several statements which don't change the horror of this or even our feelings about it necessarily, but they are true statements that we need to factor in as we think about it. Number one, God did not cause this evil. It's an example of the interference of the evil one who has always tried to cancel God's plans, who has Herod as his puppet, the evil one who messed up the story because we as humanity allowed him. We bought into the I can do it by myself line. I can do it independent of God. And we make ourselves the center and the CEO of our own life. This is just another example of what happens when we do that. The second thing, it is this evil. It is this evil that God sent and preserved this newborn king to fix. We know this is how Matthew wants his readers to understand this because at the end of our passage, verse 18, Matthew hints at it in his quotation from the prophet Jeremiah about Rachel weeping for her children. That quote is in the context of Jeremiah prophesying that the rest of the story will also come to pass, that there will be a time when those tears will end. But let's go back to these mothers and fathers of Bethlehem. Theorizing and vague promises won't heal their hearts. The question is still there, where is the justice? Can you imagine how these parents, and by the way, from what we can tell from population data that's available, there was probably about 3 or maybe up to 6 sons that were killed by Herod. It's not a massive number, but every child matters and every mother matters. So how do you think these mothers would have felt toward Mary as they witnessed her child growing up and theirs never would? One of the questions some of them surely would have asked Mary is, why didn't you warn us when God warned you? Can you imagine how they would have felt when Jesus became popular as a teacher and people are flocking to him? Would not every word have been like a twist of the knife in their hearts? Why does this mother get to have a proud heart and I have a lifetime with an aching heart because of him? I wonder how many of them wanted to say to Jesus, if you really came from God, why would I want the kind of God who did that to me? But then, as I go through the rest of the story, I have to wonder if some of them might have been in that crowd watching this son being crucified. What are they thinking now? As they see the one whose life has been preserved, now brutally murdered, more consciously and more painfully, more shamefully than their own children. Some of them may have said, at least in their hearts, as they saw Mary, well, sucks to be her, but now maybe she knows how we feel. Maybe it's not justice, but at least it's poetic justice. Or would at least some of these mothers, as Jesus looked into their eyes from the cross, been able to comprehend that he is the God who sees their tears, who cares about their tears, and who on that cross was meeting them in their tears and weeping with them in their tears. That their tears break his heart too. And could they believe that one day he himself will wipe away all their tears? As they saw the sign nailed to his cross, King of the Jews, which is what? It's the question of the Magi at his birth. Where is he that is born King of the Jews? I wonder if some of them might have thought of Isaiah's prophecy of this one who is to come. And some of them may have been moved to see justice in a whole new light. Isaiah 53, surely he took up our pain, bore our suffering, yet we considered himself punished by God, stricken by him, afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities, not his. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Could they see in him the one who, as he promised his disciples when he told them about his coming death, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices, but your grief will turn to joy? How could that grief turn to joy? Because they will begin to understand that on the cross, Jesus, God himself, is saying, I am taking on myself all the injustices caused by evil that was brought on by humanity turning away, so I can bring you back to me. I wonder if some of these mothers would have been able to look forward as John wraps up the story in the book of Revelation based on Jesus' promise that one day he will wipe away all our tears. Andrew Peterson, in that song, After the Last Tear Falls, puts it this way. In the end, we'll see how the tears that have fallen we're caught in the nail-scarred palms of the giver of love and the lover of all. And we'll look back on those tears as old tales. Those tears, all tears, every single one of our tears will turn into the sparkling, beautiful, refreshing water of the river of life. It's very clear in Matthew's account of the ending to Jesus' earthly story that the reason he has the gall and the insight to start Jesus' story the way he does is that he has come to terms with the meaning of how Jesus' earthly life really ends. Have you? Are you? You see, the one thing that matters this Christmas is knowing that Christmas is not canceled. It happens, which means that the plans of God cannot ever and will never be canceled. It's the central demonstration in history of that wonderful promise from Psalm 33. The Lord foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of the peoples, but the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations. You see, because of Jesus, it's no longer about next man up. It's all about last man standing. And who is standing with him? We know from the book of Revelation, the message of which is that he is the one who will be left standing. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the ending, the one who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. Nothing and nobody can cancel the plan of God, and the plan of God is still and will always be Jesus. And he invites us to know that today we are standing in him. Are you? Are you standing? Not with chin out defiance or with shoulder drooped discouragement. I don't know what plans have been canceled for you or will be, or what dreams will not come true, but will you go into it resting in, rejoicing, and surrendering into the plan of God in Jesus that will not and cannot be canceled?